be aware of recorded. And we have a Google Doc where you can follow along with the agenda and take notes. There'll be sections where people can be adding their notes. And if you have run into any trouble with Zoom or just want to generally have running commentary, you can use the Zoom chat. And if you're not speaking, we please kindly ask you to mute. You can also face mute, just because it's sometimes nice to not have to always be like, on camera. And lastly, I just want to acknowledge, we are still in a pandemic, and we're amid compounding crises, including hurricanes and fires and many, many other troubling things. And people are experiencing these challenges very differently. So I invite us to just be as kind and compassionate as we can be in this call and beyond. So yeah, why are we doing these calls? We hope to hear from you in a second about what you're hoping to get out of it. But a few of us were, I guess, thinking about and struggling with the fact that we're living in a climate crisis. And we were also very inspired and have been a part of open movement or open movements for a while. And we're saying, what can or should the open movement do to really respond meaningfully to this moment? So we started a pilot series of calls that started in March, and we have our last ones coming up next month, where we basically were talking with people who were also thinking about these issues and trying to understand, what are the opportunities or some of the approaches that we could think about broadly under this open climate idea. And if you're interested, you can read a little bit more about our past calls and conversations. There's a link in our wiki. And we also tried to write an article which was framing some of the larger questions we were talking about. And so one of those ideas was around a fossil-free internet. And so we have the amazing Chris Adams, who will come in a moment and share a little bit of his perspective on what openness can be doing to help green the internet. But before we get to hear that good stuff, in the Google Doc, there's a section called Introductions. And since we're a large group, we're not going to have everyone turn their mics on and say hello, but we would invite you to add your name, your email if you'd like to be in touch with us later. You don't have to write your email if you don't want to, and what brings you to this call. And then maybe after a few people have written, we could do just a handful of people if you want to say hello and say that out loud. I'll just go on mute for a moment, and I invite you to add to the Google Doc what brings you to this call and your name. If you've already added your name, I invite you to maybe check above and see if there's someone maybe cool or interesting that you're like, oh, I'd like to learn more about this person. Feel free to comment or annotate or just read who else is here in the call. And in a minute, I might open the mic just to maybe hear just the voices of 2 or 3 other people. It's always nice to have more than just the text. And then we'll move into the topic of the day. Okay, so maybe if you'd like to say hello, just unmute yourself and go for it. And we'll just take maybe 2 or 3 people saying that.
Well, hello from Costa Rica. So good to see you beautiful people in all your respective rectangles.
Hello. So we may not have that much action verbally, although I appreciate the braveness of Gunnar to say hello. But in the Google Doc, there's a lot happening. So a huge thanks for people putting their comments and energy in there. And thank you all for being here. So I would like to turn then for a moment to Chris, who's going to share a little bit about a fossil-free internet, how openness can help, and with no further ado, people can take notes as Chris talks in this section too, or we can start to gather questions and comments. But Chris, welcome to the Open Climate Call. I think you're going to share your screen, and we'd love to hear your input.
So with a bit of luck, some of you folks should be able to see my screen. If you can, would some of you give some kind of affirmative, like a nod, thumbs up? Excellent. That's what I wanted to see. Okay, I'm just going to put on a way so I can see the notes and see what next slide comes up. And then if you folks are sitting comfortably, I think I'll begin. All right. Hello, folks. My name is Chris Adams. I'm one of the directors of the Green Web Foundation, which is an NGO set up to basically speed the transition of the internet away from fossil fuels. So we have an entirely fossil-free internet by 2030. I'm also one of the organizers of climateaction.tech, which is a relatively large online community of climate concerned and climate active techies. And with Michelle Thorne, the co-host on this call, I also am one of the editors of Branch magazine, which is a magazine for people who dream of a sustainable internet. In the very, very short time I have with you, we're going to cover these three things here. We're going to talk about a fossil-free internet, talk about gold as a way to internalize these ideas, and then open as a lever against climate delay. Now, we talk about a fossil-free internet, partly because there's a moral case, but there's also a very, very strong economic case these days now, because the renewables have basically got so cheap and so plentiful that this is not really a matter of if this happens, it's a case of when this happens. But because we're in a climate emergency, we really, really need to speed this up. And I think there are two things that we might do, because when you speak to scientists and you hear what scientists say, they use phrases to describe the kind of action we might need. They talk about rapid, far-reaching, unprecedented terms. And when scientists say these terms, that's a very, very concerned. That's really, that's their version of jumping up and down and screaming at us to get on with this. And I think there are two ways that you can kind of act on this, and two ways that we kind of think about this. So we are concerned primarily, our NGO is with the greening of the internet itself. So we talk about engaging as professionals, embedding these values in how we work so that we lead with values first. But there's also and you can also talk about engaging as a member of society. And the second half of this talk, I'll talk a little bit about that. But first of all, I'll talk about how we embed these ideas as professionals and how we work. We use this phrase called GOLD, which stands for green, open, lean, and distributed. And I'll run through examples of how we do this and in embodying these ideas when we work as climate-aware technologists. So green, as you'd imagine, is green energy and green material inputs. And it takes energy, and there is climate pollution caused by running computers, because the internet is the largest fossil-powered machine in the world. But because computers are basically sand that we've taught to think, by applying lots of energy, there's a carbon footprint there as well. So the thing I should probably share with you is that when you work with fossil energy, we are basically arguing for moving to use as much green energy as possible and powering all our services. And the reason we want to do this is because even though we know that we can't control everything ourselves, and let's say when you're running you can't really run a website on solar panels only, we do know that by getting people to invest large amounts of money into renewables, you can eventually shift things across so that you end up with a greener grid for everyone over time. And this is one thing we campaign for. We, over the last 10 years, have been tracking which websites run on renewables and which ones don't, to kind of basically make this easy so people can either like shop accordingly or write this into how they procure and do stuff like that. And we release these data sets as open data so they can be surfaced by others. And an example of this is website carbon. So you can check a website to see roughly what the carbon emissions are from that website. And you'll see at the bottom, you'll see where something shows this is showing as bog standard energy. We basically provide that data. So even though we show something ourselves, we increase our reach by using open as a lever for some degree of change. We also talk about open because it's useful in lots of other areas. And when I say open, I don't just mean open source, because transparency and open data is a kind of wider movement, as you well know. But this is a good example. If you are thinking about the environmental impact of where you might be deploying the technology, a lot of it is going to come from the fact that they're using servers uses lots of energy. So things like, say, electricity maps show where in the world you might choose to run servers for the greenest possible power. And this is using open data from various parts of the world and then packaged up into a relatively nice, easy to use API. And large numbers of companies are now using this kind of information to basically reduce the environmental impact of the infrastructure they use for any of their digital services they have. We also talk about lean as part of gold, so optimizing the way you work for carbon emissions. And I showed you one example of websites, but there's also a footprint from the actual gadgets and tools we use right now. And this chart from Nokia's own digital footprint report shows some of this, where essentially there is a carbon footprint from energy, but there's also a carbon footprint from making things. And here, open is also a useful lever. There are now a real shift to have some more kind of open laptops and open tools, which extend through extended lifespan, end up with lower emissions on a kind of per year basis, basically. And this is a bit like the Fairphone idea, the ideas for the Fairphone, but applied to laptops now. So this is one other option. Then finally, we talk about distributed, as in choosing to run the move work, as you can see, through time and space to avoid carbon emissions. Now, this sounds really, really showy, but it's not really. Like an example we spoke about before was running computer jobs in different parts of the world or using different regions if you use a cloud provider. One option is basically timing the work you do or timing the use of power to have a lower carbon footprint. And in the UK, people use open data to basically green how they bake by waiting for there to be lots of renewables on the grid before they start baking cakes. And this is an idea that we actually use ourselves when we build websites now. So Branch Magazine is a magazine that Michelle and I are editors of. And when there's loads of green energy on the grid, we show a high kind of full fat version of the website. But when the grid is going to be dirtier, we show a kind of lighter, kind of lower carbon version by sending just only what we need to send over the wire, as an example of like embedding these values in how we work. And the reason I talk about these values, I'll get to in a second, but this is it, basically green, gold. So green, open, lean, and distributed. This is an example of applying it as a professional technologist. But there are other levers that we have available, and this is probably what we might talk about more in this time. There's loads of other people showing up to do the work. And in many ways, that's because, well, public opinion is shifting. We might have words like predatory delay entering our lexicon now, which is used to describe how large fossil fuel companies are basically slowing down the climate action that we know is absolutely necessary these days. And yes, we're doing some of this work ourselves, but like basically so are loads and loads of people who are too young to really kind of vote or exert too much control themselves. So this is like Fridays for the Future. They turn up every Friday to basically ask us to work harder on this and move, because they don't have access to this power themselves. And this is one thing they do, but they also, them kind of shifting discourse is actually really useful for us, because it paves the way for us to use things like the law to buttress this shift in discourse, shift in opinion. And you can see examples of this. In Germany, we had Lisa Neubauer, who's a little bit like the kind of German equivalent of Greta, for example, Greta Thunberg. Her and a number of children have been working with other campaigning groups to create like an evidence base to put towards, say, like the Supreme Court. And they were able to win some landmark climate decisions to basically change Germany's trajectory in terms of basically getting to net zero. they were able to get the laws changed to force the fourth largest economy on earth to bring forward their target for net zero by 5 years. So just a handful of children are able to do this kind of stuff. But we're also seeing these kind of tactics working elsewhere. So in May, and you'll see like these happy faces here who are from Milieu Defense, which is basically their organization, and they're somewhat like the kind of Dutch equivalent to Friends of the Earth or Greenpeace. They were able to successfully sue Shell, the oil company, and win a landmark ruling, which basically meant that the Supreme Court has said to a massive oil company, we are legally compelling you to change your entire corporate strategy and bring it in line with the Paris Agreement to get to net zero by this time. We didn't know this was even possible. And this is actually an example of building an evidence base and winning these arguments. And these arguments here are based entirely around things like human rights and protecting the rights of children and people who will be alive for longer. And this is what I want to point you to. I think that one thing we can do in the world of open, yes, you can do things with technology, but I think there's real scope to share some of the tactical wins or see where cases are being won in certain places and apply them elsewhere. And there are tools like, say, these kind of databases that I show you here, the Climate Change Law database, that allows us to see where wins can be replicated in other places to actually start essentially winning more quickly, because we are starting to win these cases, but we're really, really late in the day. And right now, speed is justice. So this is what I'd share with you. I think that's all I have time for. So I'll hand over back to Michelle. But if you do want to find out more about what we do, this is the Green Web Foundation. My name is Mr. Chris Adams. And if you're looking for a group of other people to speak to online, climateaction.tech is a really good community for that. And Michelle, I'm going to hand over to you because I think that's my time used up. All right, thanks everyone.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. That was a really, really welcomed overview and really great specific ideas for action. So thank you all the people for taking notes. We wanted to appreciate the people's times who are here and a chance to kind of digest and reflect what Chris says, and also bring, I'm sure, your own experiences and insights and questions to this. So we're going to do a small group discussions. We're going to be going into breakout groups in a moment where we have some prompts that you can find in the Google Doc that help to maybe reflect and unpack. And then we would invite you maybe first to do a little bit of silent writing. At least I find in Zoom land, sometimes it helps just to have things quiet and write for a moment. And then we can maybe talk amongst the group, and we'll be coming back to, as a larger group, to maybe share some of the, things that really stuck out with you, and we'll then wrap up the call from there. So while Shannon prepares our amazing breakout room button, some of the questions we're thinking you might want to ask is, where else could openness be used to change the status quo, especially towards a fossil-free internet? What are other open practices and assets that exist that could help transition the internet to renewables? And what actions speak to you personally? And who else is doing relevant work, and who else should be in these conversations? And then the wild card, any other reflections or questions or ideas that that sparked for you. So Shannon, when you're ready, we might then break into our groups and be in that first few minutes of silent writing and then discussion, and come back in 15 minutes. That sounds all right for people?
Yep, and it looks like we'll go into 5 different rooms. I'm just going to assign them automatically. So we'll have a little bit of a roulette to see who you end up with. If you get lost in Zoom, send me a message and I will help you figure out how to not be lost.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, you all should be ready to go.
Okay, sorry for interrupting. There, done.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for the great typing and discussing. So for the next bit, definitely feel free to capture those last great ideas. Don't want to lose them. But we wanted to do maybe just to go around to each group and just share some of the highlights that came out of your discussion or reflections. Maybe you didn't get a chance to answer all the questions. That's okay. You didn't get a chance to even synthesize your ideas. That's also okay. There's just a sense to get to hear what was resonating with people or what other questions came up. So with that, maybe we'll go to group 1. Is there someone from group 1 who'd like to share what you all talked about and what you're taking away? You may also not remember your group number.
Oh, yeah. No, sorry. Like Alex was distracting me. Like, sorry about that. We actually share a lot of interesting things. Someone actually said, you know, I think the questions are very open. So I'm gonna like pose these new questions to you folks. And that included asking ourselves, what is exactly the definition of internet that we are using for this conversation? And that could include either the community internet or the internet based on big companies, or the internet, the deep dark internet that is doing Bitcoin mining. Which one of those are the internets that we're talking about? And I think that gave us a lot of room to have a very interesting conversation around the value gap, around those different definitions of the internet, and how we could actually inspire or track or make some action around some of these issues, starting from the very big companies to the community, the internet, the community-based internet. And I hope I sort of captured what folks were discussing, but feel free to, you know, jump and say, I think that you didn't cover this point.
Papa, est-ce qu'on peut aller demander à Jeanne si on peut jouer avec elle ou pas?
So we got a next generation weighing in.
Là. Donc,
So I don't know if we're able to mute you, Chris. Sorry about that, or Chris Leprin. Someone from group 2, would you like to share what you all talked about?
I can try.
Yes, go for it, Amelia.
We had like a very divergent conversation, which was really nice. But I think the main takeaway was a comment I think that Marcela had, that was about us as members of society are looking for prompts on how to do action. And I think it's part of our work in developing a cleaner, more sustainable internet to help give others those prompts and telling them this is what you should be doing, right? So, and I think it's important to believe that everyone's expecting to know what to do and how to move forward and how to take action.
And thank you, Amelia, for reporting from group 2. Is there someone from group 3 who'd like to share? If not, no worries. We will read. Actually, I was really enjoying people's comments and stuff in there. So if no one from group 3 wants to share them out loud, we could go to group 4.
Hi, this is Karin, and I have been volunteered. The group was very earnestly typing, and so there's lots of notes there. And then really for me, the big takeaway question was, well, what are hosting companies doing? Why aren't they just all kind of immediately jumping on this bandwagon? And then we realized, well, we're not entirely sure whether they are jumping on this bandwagon. And so we realized that actually, apart from people who make decisions about hosting services very particularly in a corporate way, we don't really have enough information about that. Certainly not as an end user. And then Chris of the Delightful Interlude kind of described a little bit about how decision-making happens in the company that he's with, and actually how many complex moving parts there are in making decisions about these things, and how even for people who run hosting services, then the people who they rely on for infrastructure is still to a large extent a black box. And so there are all these different little bit of moving parts that you think should be an easy decision, but actually turns out that it's not. And then that, for me, compounds that decision is, are there trade-offs to be made with things like security, for instance? Lots of people are talking about geographies in which you host. Should you be hosting somewhere else? But then if you make that security decision, what does that look like for your fossil fuel or your energy decisions? And how important are those trade-offs and at which point? Because the important part of this is that this is really a moving living beast, and it's going to continuously evolve, and that's what we want, because we want to change from one static position to another one, but in that there's going to be lots of toing and throwing in different points at which things happen. And how can we find a better roadmap for that and better tools to figure out what does that look like?
Oh, brilliant recap. Thank you. I really appreciate the questions that you all raised and that summary. Amazing group 4. Thank you. Group 5, would you like to share what you all discussed?
I can share a little bit, and this maybe touches on some of what's already been said. But what came up for me in thinking about this is something that I've been struggling with for about 10 years in the open movement, which is that I think the concept of open as a strategy is a little incomplete, especially when we're dealing with large, powerful systems or large, powerful structures. For example, one tactic that recently came up in the open software community that I observed was, someone advocating to do something similar to what's just been done in the advertising industry with the Clean Creatives campaign, where they basically said, all advertising companies should blacklist extractive companies and refuse to make media for them. And this was a somewhat different angle, but it was like you had a software developer saying we should change open source licenses to forbid the use of this software by extractive companies. And the reception to this idea, which seems to me like worth exploring, was pretty universally negative and hostile from the open source world. And I can't really comment on like the intricacies of licensing. Maybe this particular idea wasn't a good one, but it seemed really clear that like people who are steeped in this idea of openness were like, we can't set boundaries around who can use this. Which I've seen show up elsewhere, where it's like, if you're trying to build power and value, in other contexts, it is understood that you do need to create boundaries. You need to exclude some people. You need to say what is allowed and what isn't. And in the open world, it seems like there's a culture that resists that essentially work, that conceptual and community-based work of determining what is and isn't allowed. And I guess that's a question that I have for this group is like, is that a conversation worth having in this context?
Awesome provocation. There's some good head nodding here, which may be then a nice time actually to open it up to like the larger group. If you'd like to, maybe we'll give ourselves like 5 or so minutes to respond to what people have said or anything that's come up for you. Feel free to unmute or raise your hand with the little emoji hand that's here. If you'd like to weigh in. And bye, Sarah. Thank you for joining. Chris, would you like to respond first?
I actually agree with what Greg has said. And one thing we discussed was this notion of recourse. Like you need more than just having open as a lever, because this is why I was pointing to other people using this power. Because if you don't have a real kind of idea of who's likely to be using the power, then yeah, you could have all these unintended side effects. So I think there's countless examples of people just opening things up without thinking who's enabled first, or even thinking about how do you make it accessible or more easy to use than for particular groups, or be a bit more, I guess, aware of how you expect it to be used, perhaps to kind of set some kind of expected uses, or at least communicate these kind of values.
Thank you for that. Diego, you also had your hand up.
Yes, so I'm very excited actually what you were saying, Greg. I'm going to speak as a software developer, actually, we're like so guilty about all this stuff. So software development, specifically open source, right, it has like a big issue is that we're open to one side only. So open source normally is actually open to the side of the companies, right? And the reason for that is because the people that are actually like paying for the open source labor, right, are actually the larger companies that are benefiting from actually reselling their software package in a different way, right? So this licensing issue is actually affecting people's livelihood, right? And because open source communities are not necessarily open in every aspect, right? It's like they're open source, but maybe they're not agreeing on like climate change. And many of them are actually making side money on like generating like NFTs or like Bitcoin mining, right? Where I'm very guilty into that. I wanted to actually use I like analogies here. It's like one of the big issues where we can actually, as software developers, attack and like this problem with like global warming is actually making better practices on how we code things, right? Right now, the code that we're producing, right, is extremely redundant, and we're overusing the power that the machines that are driving that, right, really need. And one of the things I would like notice that we're like really not recycling, right, old practices where we're like limited in power of the computers, right? So we're building software for the newer machines that require a lot of energy, right? But we used to actually do good things 10 or 20 years ago with less power, right? It's a political issue because the people producing the devices, right, are giving us more power. And a tiny phone on your hand has more power right now than a server 20 years ago, right? Or 10 years ago, even, right? So because software is the brain of the machines that are actually using the energy, I think this is a good start. It's like if we want to make a change about openness, it's actually open software to the community on one side, making it more clear, right? Because it's open also, like it's close to knowledge, right? But also like being open about our practices and sharing these practices with the world, which includes, for example, remove automatic testing from every pull request you make. Where you're making changes in code, hundreds of tiny computers are spinning just to test your code. When you already have a computer at home that can do that, and it's already turned on, right? Political statement here, sorry.
No, that's
And
I
mea
appreciate that
culpa.
too. No, I really appreciate the points you're bringing up. And there was a lot of also, yeah, looked like agreements and head nodding. I wanted to open the floor if there's anyone else who wanted to add. We have like a few more minutes to discuss if you have another question or reflection, provocation.
I think we have Matt with your hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, and scan. We'll do Matt and scan and to bring us home.
All right. Now, I like that exploring the because all of this is political. I mean, just regretfully, that's just how it is in the world that we live in. And I'm kind of interested just in the first time I thought about it, but was just mentioned the idea of having maybe even you have open source, but do you have community software that has more structures around it that we're building this for people, not for corporations. And I know that's getting a little afar from kind of just the environmental side of things, but the community is so important when it comes to environmental issues and energy issues. So I just want to say that I'm intrigued by that. I'm not I don't know nearly as much about programming as probably most of the people on here, but that idea of licensing is a really interesting potential mechanism to get to more community-based open programming software.
Oh, cool. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for sharing that. Scan, you'll be our last question/comment, and then we'll wrap up the call.
No, I'm glad that Matt just brought that comment, right? I think that one of the things that we have been exploring in this calls, even when today's call facilitated by Chris was all around like the internet in more of the like hardware machine infrastructure sense. We have also been discussing a lot about like the open communities, like Wikimedia movement, and all the open licensing folks. And I think that there are differences there between the open software movement and the open culture, so to speak, movement. And so I think it's good that in a way, I feel that what Diego is bringing is very important, because it's like, oh, let's focus also in the practices that are more around how do we build or you know, or things, be it like a large collaborative encyclopedia or software.
Yeah, thank you for helping me remind that, yeah, that the perspectives we've also been talking not just about open source in the software sense, but in culture and other practices and data and beyond. Nice. All right. Well, we're moving into the Karen. Okay, Karen, I see your hand. You get to squeeze in as the last comment. Go for it, and then we'll close out the day.
No, it just, I was reminded about this idea of doing things collaboratively and building on top of open. You know, we speak a lot about releasing things openly, but we don't really speak that much about reusing things that are open. And maybe if everybody didn't build their own thing every time, that would also be one of the ways in which we could reduce our energy usage. And so the open part for me is not just how we as creators behave in terms of what we release openly, but how we as creators and consumers think about what can we reuse and what can we build upon, rather than continuing to recreate in different corners of the internet.
Yeah, it's funny how the recycling meant reduce, reuse, recycle still seems like it might apply here. Amazing. Chris Adams, I might turn it to you if you want. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but if you wanted to have any sort of a concluding word, because you shared that brilliant presentation, or any other thoughts to close us out with.
I think okay. The thing I wish I'd said previously that is in the chat and probably not captured for the recording is that when we talk about any like decarbonizing any industry, ultimately all this stuff is about power, not necessarily energy, and who you're choosing to enable. And you can quite easily have a kind of closed, very, very oppressive green internet, right? Not sure that's what we want, which is why it's important to talk about open in some ways as like open plus recourse, or open in the context of there being some effective and functioning governance and thinking about how it can actually be used rather than just sharing it for sharing's sake, even though in some cases when there's already asymmetry, it can help. I think that's the thing I'll probably just round off with. It's about power, not just energy, as the thing I'd like everyone to take away with them. Yep, that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, thank you all for the excellent discussion and comments and provocations. This is concluding our August Open Climate call. What we're gonna do from here is we're gonna take the kind of transcripts and notes from this call and turn it into a more public facing kind of summary, which you'll find on the wiki and whenever as soon as we're able to do that. There'll be another call that's wrapping up our pilot series in September on the 28th, same time, probably same Zoom channel. That's going to be hosted by Shannon. And Shannon, I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you'd like to give a teaser about that call, or we can say it's going to be amazing and cumulative and taking us forward from where OpenClimate could and should go.
Well, I would just like to
ahead.
say, as Matt prefaced, New Orleanians are a bit distracted at the moment. My hope was to be able to get you a call topic as of last Friday. It hasn't happened yet. However, if there are folks on this call, especially after this one, that have a topic that you feel like is really compelling, we're very open to hosting a call around it. And also seeing Matt on here. Matt, sorry to put you on the spot, but Matt has worked with Healthy Gulf for years, and I know him a bit in that context. I might be really interested in bringing in folks that are doing community organizing, because we haven't had a lot of those yet, to see if we can have a conversation about what open and the open movement can do to support the work that y'all are doing. So Matt, I may be reaching out to you. Otherwise,
yeah, I'd be happy to help out with that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, we might have a topic.
Awesome. And a huge thank you and hearts out to New Orleanians. Thank you for making the time to be on the call, even despite everything that's going on. Thank you everyone for making the time to be here and for sharing your thoughts and your ideas. I really appreciate you, and I hope to see you in September, and in the meanwhile on a increasingly fossil-free internet. All right. Bye everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank y'all. Got to run, but looking forward to discussing.